The sky above Haven 9 had a strange violet tint, streaked with dust and ash from the asteroid storms that never stopped. Metal scraps and old shipping containers jutted out from every corner, forming a jagged city on the colony's surface. Life here was a daily battle. Most humans kept to themselves, scavenging, repairing, surviving. Only a few dared to risk more than just themselves. Corin Vale was one of those few. His clothes were worn, patched in dozens of places. His hands bore tiny burns and cuts, scars from welding, scraping, and lifting what most people considered garbage. Yet his eyes were sharp, always searching, always thinking. He could see what others overlooked. A chance to fix, a way to improve, a way to save. On this day he spotted something small and strange in the corner of the settlement. A patchwork house built from old panels and scraps shook under the wind. Rain from the storm leaked through holes in the roof. But it wasn't the water that drew Corin's attention, it was the faint glow inside. Fyra. The colony called her a useless hatchling, but Corin knew better. He had seen creatures like her before in old records, alien dragons small and fragile, yet brilliant, alive with fire inside their chests. They could grow strong, fast, even mighty, but only if they survived their earliest days. This little dragon needed help. Corin approached carefully, the wind pushing against him, threatening to knock him over on the uneven scrap rooftops. He could hear Fyra whimper as rain dripped from the gaps in the roof, sizzling slightly when it hit her glowing skin. He crouched low, shielding himself as much as he could from the storm. "You're not going to last like this," he muttered. "I won't let you." He inspected the roof. The panels were loose, some bent, some almost gone. The walls would not hold if the storm got worse. A careless step could send him tumbling off the side, and even if he survived, the dragon might not. Most people in Haven 9 would have passed by, claiming it wasn't worth the risk. But Corin didn't think like most people. He fetched tools from his backpack, clamps, plates, and a portable welding kit. Each item had been salvaged from broken machines and abandoned ships. The materials were imperfect, not built for the kind of storm that raged now, but Corin had a plan. If he could hold the roof together just long enough for Fyra to be safe, maybe the little dragon would survive the night. The wind howled louder. Dust cut across Corin's face. A sudden gust nearly lifted him off the roof. He tightened his grip, swinging his legs around a beam to stabilize himself. The storm felt alive, trying to push him back, testing him. His heart pounded. One wrong move and he could die here. One wrong move and Fyra could die. He refused to let either happen. He began attaching a plate over the largest hole. Sparks flew as his welding torch bit into the metal. Fyra flinched, hiding her small head, but Corin murmured soothing words. He worked faster, his hands moving almost on their own, instinct guiding him as much as skill. Another panel went on. Another clamp snapped into place. Then a piece of the roof creaked dangerously. Corin froze. The storm pushed harder. If the support gave way, he'd fall and the dragon would be crushed. He scanned the area quickly and noticed a loose beam that could hold a little extra weight. He shifted the clamp, anchoring the plate to the beam. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the wind shifted, howling through the gaps. The roof held. Fyra's glow brightened slightly, a small sign of relief. Corin wiped sweat and rain from his brow. He couldn't stop yet. One panel wasn't enough. He needed to cover the entire leaking roof before the storm worsened. He looked around, estimating how many more pieces he had and how long it would take. A sharp crack split the air. A chunk of metal tore loose from a nearby building, carried by the wind, hurtling toward them. Corin's heart jumped. He lunged, catching the edge of the beam just in time, Fyra ducking under his arm. The metal slammed to the ground below, sending sparks and dust into the air. Corin's mind raced. He had to finish, but now the danger wasn't just from the storm. It was falling debris, unstable structures, and the chemical rain mixing with the old metal, making everything slippery and dangerous. He could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing on him. A tiny life depended on his courage, his skill, and his decisions. He took a deep breath, shaking off fear. Humans survived these odds because they didn't give up. They improvised. They acted when no one else would. That was what he had to do now. A sudden, brighter flash of lightning illuminated the entire settlement. The glow of Fyra's small body flickered in response, reflecting hope, fear, and trust all at once. Corin clenched his jaw, set his hands on the next panel, and prepared to climb higher. The storm wasn't finished. The night wasn't over. And neither was the challenge. Corin's fingers ached as he gripped the jagged metal beam, the storm lashing at him like it had a mind of its own. The rain was acidic, hissing as it hit his jacket, and the wind threatened to rip Fyra from his side. But he didn't let fear slow him. Every second counted. The little dragon's life depended on him and he refused to fail. He crawled carefully across the roof, scanning for weak points. Holes were everywhere, some small, some wide enough to see the purple clouds far below. He could hear the distant shouts of the colony, though no one dared approach in this chaos. Most humans would have called this impossible, and maybe it was, but Corin had always thrived on the impossible. "Hold on, Fyra," he whispered, brushing wet strands of metal debris from her tiny wings. "We're getting through this." The first challenge came faster than he expected. A section of the roof, already weakened by years of neglect, began to tilt under his weight. If it collapsed, he would fall 10 meters at least and the dragon would be crushed. Corin froze for a heartbeat, calculating. He could either try to hold the panel in place himself, risking both their lives, or retreat and find another method. There was no time to retreat. He grabbed a heavy clamp from his pack and anchored the panel to a nearby support beam. Sparks flew as he forced it tight, sweat mixing with rain. The metal groaned, resisting, threatening to give way, but finally it held. He exhaled, glancing at Fyra. The hatchling's glow pulsed brighter for a moment, a tiny signal of trust and relief. But the storm wasn't done testing them. A sudden gust slammed against the side of the building, dislodging a stack of scrap crates nearby. They toppled, one smashing into the corner of the roof. The impact sent Corin sliding inches from the edge. Fyra squeaked, her wings fluttering instinctively. Corin's heart pounded. One wrong move now and it would all be over. He grabbed the edge of the beam with one hand and steadied himself, while with the other, he swept the debris aside, muttering curses under his breath. He looked over the roof carefully. There were still gaps, some large enough that if rain hit for another 10 minutes, it could weaken Fyra's shelter beyond repair. He had to cover them all, and fast. As he moved, he noticed the damage was worse than he'd first thought. Some of the panels were corroded by the acidic rain, brittle and flaking. Nails and bolts that had held the roof together for years had snapped or loosened. A single gust could rip the entire structure apart. Corin's mind raced, scanning his salvage tools. Could he make replacements from the scraps nearby? The answer had to be yes. Humans survived impossible odds by improvising. He grabbed a long strip of alloy from a nearby pile, bent it, and tied it with wire, reinforcing a section that might have collapsed. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold for now. Fyra hissed nervously at the movement and Corin muttered, "I know, little one. It's scary, but we're almost there." He crawled higher, careful of the slick surface, feeling the sting of acid on his skin through the thin fabric of his jacket. The wind tried to push him back, but he gritted his teeth and pressed forward. Each panel he fixed was another step toward survival. Then came the real test. A loose beam above him shifted violently. The storm had loosened the supports entirely. If it fell, it could crush both him and Fyra. Corin's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the beam with one hand, wedged it against another support with the other, and reinforced it with a salvaged clamp. The beam groaned but held. He could feel his arms trembling under the strain, but he refused to let go. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the entire settlement. Corin could see every scrap of metal, every precarious panel. The storm was relentless and time was running out. He had covered most of the roof, but the final corner was exposed. It was also the riskiest. Below it, jagged metal and broken beams could end both their lives if he slipped. A sudden screech from Fyra made him look down. The little dragon was flapping, struggling to balance on the slick surface inside. Rain had started to pool near her feet. Corin's mind raced. He couldn't leave her exposed, and he couldn't risk carrying her across the final gap. Then an idea struck. He grabbed a long piece of scrap, tied it into a temporary bridge over the weakest part of the roof, and secured it with every clamp and wire he had left. "Okay, little one. You can do this," he murmured. Fyra stepped cautiously onto the makeshift bridge, her glow flickering as she tested it. Corin stayed close, ready to catch her if it failed. Step by step she crossed. The bridge held. Corin exhaled, but the storm raged on. He had covered most of the leaks, but he knew the night would not be forgiving. A larger gust hit, rattling the structure. The roof creaked alarmingly. He glanced at Fyra, who looked back with trusting eyes. Her survival depended entirely on him, and he felt the weight of that responsibility deep in his chest. There was no turning back now. The storm would continue, more dangerous than anything they had faced so far. Corin tightened his grip on the tools, glanced at the final section, and prepared to climb higher, knowing the worst part was still ahead. The sky rumbled, and in the distance, a dark shadow of debris tumbled toward them. Corin's heart sank. This was more than just rain and wind. The storm had something else in store. And if he miscalculated even slightly, both he and Fyra could be lost. He whispered again, more to himself than anyone else, we survive together. And with that he moved toward the next danger, every muscle tense, every thought focused. The wind screamed louder now, rattling the makeshift roof like a living thing. Corin Vale's arms ached from holding panels in place, from reinforcing beams, from gripping slick metal while acid rain burned his skin through the thin fabric of his jacket. He could feel every heartbeat, sharp and urgent, reminding him that one mistake would cost both his life and Fyra's. Fyra huddled near the center of the roof, her glowing scales dim from exhaustion and fear. Her tiny wings quivered each time a gust tore through the settlement. Corin crouched beside her, scanning the remaining weak spots. He knew they had covered most leaks, but one corner remained vulnerable. A panel here would hold only if he could reinforce it with a brace, but the metal he had was thin, rusted, and unpredictable. He swore under his breath, shaking his hands to get the circulation back. Think, Corin, think, he muttered. Humans survived impossible odds because they didn't panic. They adapted. And this moment demanded adaptation. Above him, a loose beam shifted violently. If it fell, it could crush him instantly. Corin's mind raced. He needed a plan faster than he could act. The only option was to stabilize it with his exosuit's magnetic grapplers, then attach the panel at the same time. It would be risky, one misstep and the beam could take both him and Fyra down, but there was no other choice. He activated the grapplers. Magnets hissed and locked onto the metal beam, holding it steady. Sweat stung his eyes, and his muscles trembled as he wrestled the final panel into place. Sparks flew as his welding torch bit into the corroded metal. Fyra flinched, a sharp squeak escaping her throat, but Corin spoke softly, almost done. Stay with me. The wind howled like a beast, slamming the roof sideways. A chunk of debris from a nearby structure tumbled toward them, thrown by the storm's violent force. Corin had only a second to react. He leapt, catching the edge of the beam while his other hand swung the panel over the weak spot. Sparks flew, metal groaned, and for a heart-stopping moment, the roof tilted dangerously. But the grapplers held. The panel snapped into place. The structure stabilized. Corin gasped, chest heaving, adrenaline surging. He glanced at Fyra. The little dragon's glow flickered and then surged brighter, a flicker of trust and relief. But there was no time to relax. The storm intensified. Rain now fell in sheets, and Corin realized that the chemical mixture had started eating through some of the metal faster than he had anticipated. One gust could tear a hole right through. He scanned his remaining supplies. He had a few pieces of flexible alloy, clamps, and some polymer sheeting salvaged from old freighters. Not enough for a perfect repair, but enough for improvisation. He had to act fast. Humans survived not by waiting for perfect tools. They survived by using what they had. Corin grabbed the polymer sheeting and anchored it over a gap too large for metal panels. The wind fought him every step, twisting the sheet like a living thing. Sparks from his torch flared, the light reflecting off the rain in sharp streaks. Fyra pressed close, trusting him completely. Corin worked quickly, improvising braces from wire and bent panels, reinforcing the weak roof as the storm roared. Then a new danger emerged. A micrometeor slammed into the edge of the settlement, throwing sparks and debris across the roof. Corin's heart jumped. If it struck the panels he had just secured, the structure would collapse. He swung the grapplers, locking the panels in place just as a shard of metal sliced past him. Fyra shrieked but stayed huddled under his arm. Corin realized something important. He couldn't just fix the roof. He needed a shield, something to divert falling debris and chemical rain while he finished the repairs. He rummaged through his pack and pulled out a portable shield generator, heavy and awkward. Positioning it took every ounce of strength he had. He angled it just right, creating a temporary safe zone over Fyra while he worked. Sparks flew, rain hissed, and the wind tore at him, but he didn't let go. Step by step, panel by panel, clamp by clamp, he reinforced the remaining weak spots. Fyra's glow brightened with each success, wings spreading slightly, testing the sturdiness of the roof. Corin allowed himself a brief, sharp smile. Almost there. Then another challenge, this one unexpected. A section of the roof above them, unstable and barely hanging, threatened to collapse. Corin had to move beneath it to finish securing the last panel. If it fell, both he and Fyra would be crushed. His mind raced, calculating angles, weight distribution, and wind patterns. Humans survived impossible odds because they could think under pressure, and Corin's mind never stopped. He activated the grapplers again, this time anchoring the hanging section while simultaneously welding the panel below. Sparks flew, rain hissed, and Corin's arms shook with effort. Fyra pressed close, trusting him entirely. Inch by inch, the panel clicked into place. The roof groaned under the pressure but held. For the first time that night, Corin allowed himself to breathe. Fyra's glow flared, wings unfurling slightly, a quiet triumph amidst chaos. They weren't safe yet, the storm still raged, but the worst of the leaks were gone. The little dragon could survive at least for now. Corin glanced over the edge of the roof, seeing the jagged scrap of the settlement beneath them. The storm had tested every skill, every instinct, every ounce of courage he had. He realized that survival was never about avoiding danger, it was about meeting it head-on with intelligence, determination, and heart. And yet, as he packed away his tools, the distant hum of the colony's enforcement drones reached him over the wind. He froze. Their lights cut through the violet haze, sweeping across the settlement like watchful eyes. Corin had broken protocol, scavenged restricted materials, and faced the storm in ways the Council would never approve. The storm wasn't the only threat anymore. The drones were coming. Corin took a deep breath. He had saved the little dragon for now, but the real test, the challenge that could change everything, was just beginning. Corin crouched low, the shield generator humming weakly beside him, wind slicing through the gaps in the roof. Fyra pressed close, wings trembling but glowing steadily now. The little dragon had survived the worst of the storm thanks to Corin's courage, but the moment of relief was fleeting. In the distance, the colony's enforcement drones swept toward the settlement, their searchlights slicing through violet clouds and rain. He could feel their presence like a weight in his chest. These drones didn't just patrol, they enforced the Council's rules without hesitation. Any violation, any use of restricted materials, any action outside protocol could earn severe punishment. Corin had broken every rule on the books to save Fyra. And yet he didn't hesitate. Humanity survived impossible odds because humans acted when others would freeze. He adjusted the shield generator slightly, angling it toward the drones, just enough to keep Fyra covered from direct scanning beams. The first drone hovered over the roof. Its sensors glowed a cold blue, scanning. Corin held his breath. He could feel the wet metal beneath him shifting slightly, every movement amplified by the storm. One misstep and he and Fyra could fall. The drone's hum grew louder, the lights swinging closer. Corin's mind raced. Retreat was impossible. The dragon was too small, too fragile to survive outside the roof now. His only option was to prove quickly that what he had done wasn't reckless, it was necessary. Corin reached for his datapad, an old, battered device he had salvaged from a derelict freighter. He uploaded diagnostic logs from the shield generator, structural readings from the roof, and his notes on the polymer and alloy patches he'd improvised. Each byte of data was a record of success, of stability, of human ingenuity in the face of deadly odds. The drone sensors swept over him and Fyra, scanning, calculating, and finally, hovered in place unarmed. The storm howled louder, masking the hum of the next drone as it approached. Corin's heart pounded. The second drone's spotlight swept directly across the roof, reflecting off Fyra's glowing scales. The little dragon hissed softly. Corin adjusted his shield, keeping the beam from fully striking them. He muttered under his breath, "Stay calm, little one. Almost there." The drone's sensors flickered over the uploaded data. Corin had no idea how it processed information, but he hoped it recognized logic and necessity. One more gust of wind shook the roof, and Corin braced himself, gripping a support beam tightly. If the roof collapsed now, everything would be lost. The drone's light paused, scanning the patched roof. Fyra's glow pulsed brightly, tiny wings spread in what looked almost like defiance. Then a third drone approached from above. Its engines cut sharply through the storm, the spotlight cutting a path toward them. Corin's mind raced. He had no more grapplers, no more panels, and the polymer patches were at their limits. Improvisation had carried him this far, but this was the ultimate test. He took a deep breath, scanning the debris-strewn area for anything that could help. His eyes landed on a stack of old metallic crates near the building's edge. They were heavy, but if he could push them into place, he might create a small barrier to shield Fyra from the drone sensors while the uploaded data continued to transmit. Corin's muscles tensed. It was dangerous, slippery metal, strong wind, uneven footing, but human determination refused to let him hesitate. He grabbed the nearest crate and pushed it over the edge, letting it slide into place against the roof's weak section. Sparks flew where it scraped the metal roof, but it held, creating a makeshift shield. Fyra's glow flared as she pressed behind it. Corrin repeated the process, stacking 2 more crates and anchoring them with wire and clamps. The drones hovered, sensors sweeping, engines whining, but the data streaming from Corrin's pad reinforced the makeshift shield's stability. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. Corrin stood behind the crates, hands on the roof for balance, heart hammering. The drones lingered, scanning. Fyra stepped cautiously out from behind the crates, testing the wind and rain. Her glow was steady now, confidence returning. Corrin realized he had done it. Not with brute force, not with rules or permissions, but with intelligence, courage, and the willingness to act when no one else would. A crackle came through the comms system, a warning tone from the council. Corrin ignored it. Humanity survived impossible odds not by following rules blindly, but by thinking, risking, and acting for the greater good. He tapped his datapad one last time, sending the final structural report to the colony's central AI. The drones hovered, sensors calculating, then, unexpectedly, one after another they began to ascend, retreating back toward the colony. The storm still raged, but the immediate threat was gone. Corrin exhaled, leaning against the crates. He looked down at Fyra. The little dragon's wings stretched fully now, her glow warm and steady. She chirped softly, circling above him, testing the air. Corrin smiled, though exhaustion weighed him down like a lead coat. He had faced the storm, the unstable roof, falling debris, chemical rain, and the council's enforcers, and he had succeeded. But the real challenge remained, convincing the colony that what he had done was not reckless but visionary. That a human had saved a fragile alien life, using only courage, ingenuity, and determination. He glanced at the horizon. More storms would come, more dangers would follow, but Corrin didn't fear them. Humans survived because they faced impossible odds head-on, because they acted when others froze, because they refused to abandon life, even the smallest, most fragile forms. Fyra circled above him again, her glow bright against the violet storm, a living symbol of trust, survival, and human heroism. Corrin knew the next step was crucial. If the colony refused to acknowledge their efforts, their victory tonight could mean nothing. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself a single, sharp breath of satisfaction. The storm was not over. The night was not won. But one human had already made the difference between life and death. And that difference was enough to change everything. The storm had begun to ease, leaving behind a restless wind and a violet sky streaked with lingering clouds. Corrin Vale crouched on the roof, sweat and rain dripping from his brow, muscles trembling from hours of strain. Fyra perched on a reinforced beam beside him, wings slightly extended, glowing softly in the dim light. The little dragon had survived the worst of the storm, but the night's challenges were far from over. Below, the colony stirred. Lights flickered in the scrap-built buildings, signaling curiosity, fear, and skepticism. Corrin knew the council drones would report everything he had done. Unauthorized materials, dangerous improvisation, defiance of protocol. Most humans would have hidden, accepted punishment, or fled. Not Corrin. Humanity thrived when people took responsibility, acted with courage, and refused to abandon those in need. He climbed down carefully, each step measured on the wet, unstable surface. Fyra followed, tail brushing his shoulder. Corrin reached the edge of the settlement where the first council drones had hovered earlier. The glowing blue sensors now flickered as they assessed the rooftop repairs. He approached one, raising his datapad. "I've uploaded structural diagnostics," he said aloud, his voice steady against the gusting wind. "The roof is stable. The polymer patches, alloy reinforcements, and protective barriers will hold against future storms. The little dragon survived because of these measures." The drone hovered, analyzing. Its light swept over Fyra, whose glow pulsed brightly. Then, unexpectedly, it emitted a soft chime. Corrin understood. The AI recognized that the repairs were sound, that his actions were not reckless, but intelligent and necessary. He glanced at Fyra, and the dragon chirped softly, circling him in a display of trust and gratitude. Corrin exhaled sharply. He had done more than save one fragile creature. He had proven that human ingenuity and courage could overcome impossible odds. But there was more to do. The council would arrive, and he needed them to see the results, not just the risks. He climbed to a higher vantage point, letting Fyra rest beside him. From there, he could see the entire settlement, roofs patched, walkways reinforced, and small barriers erected to prevent future collapse. Storm damage still marked the colony, but his improvised repairs had transformed one small corner into a safe haven. Minutes later, the council arrived in a hovercraft, their sleek, formal uniforms contrasting with the jagged metal of Haven 9. They were silent, observing from above, their sensors scanning every panel and patch. Corrin stood tall, exhaustion heavy but pride firmer in his chest. He had no fear of their judgment. Humans earned respect not by avoiding danger, but by confronting it head-on with courage and intelligence. One council member, a stern woman named Lyra Tane, descended first. She examined the patched roof, her brow furrowed. Corrin held the data pad toward her, showing structural data, storm simulations and emergency reinforcements. "You ignored protocol," Lyra said sharply, voice carrying over the wind. "You could have died. You endangered the colony." Corrin met her gaze evenly. "Yes, but Fyra would have died too. The storm doesn't care about protocol. I used what I had, thought quickly, and made her safe. The roof is sound. The little dragon survives. And so does the colony corner we just protected." A tense silence followed. Then a murmur ran through the council team as they scanned the reports. The AI simulations confirmed Corrin's calculations. The improvised patches were effective. The panels would hold even under chemical rain or falling debris. Lyra stepped back, nodding slowly. "It appears your improvisation worked. Against the odds, against the storm, you succeeded." Her tone shifted subtly, acknowledging bravery and skill. Corrin's heart lifted. Humans survived because they acted when no one else would. Tonight, that truth had been proven. Fyra chirped, lifting into the sky with a powerful beat of her wings. Her glow flared brilliantly, illuminating the battered settlement below. The colony's residents watched from their shelters, awe in their faces. Even the council's stern expressions softened. A tiny alien dragon, saved by one human's courage, had become a symbol of hope, ingenuity, and the extraordinary potential of humanity. Corrin exhaled, lowering his shoulders. The storm had tested him, pushed him to the brink, and demanded every ounce of his intelligence and skill. He had survived. Fyra had survived. And together they had shown what humans could achieve. Compassion paired with daring, courage paired with brains, determination paired with action. Weeks later, the corner of Haven 9 that Corrin had repaired became a model for the rest of the settlement. Other humans began reinforcing their structures with his methods. Safety improved, storm damage decreased, and the colony slowly adapted, inspired by one human who had refused to look away. Fyra grew stronger every day, her wings broad and her glow steady. She became a living symbol of hope, courage, and trust in humanity. Corrin didn't care about titles or praise. He had acted because it was right. Because when a life is at stake, no matter how small or alien, it is human responsibility to act, to risk, to save. That was the measure of humanity. That was the legacy he would leave, not in medals or records, but in lives changed and hope restored. One evening, as the violet sky settled into calm, Corrin watched Fyra fly toward the horizon, her wings cutting gracefully through the dying wind. A soft smile touched his lips. He had faced impossible odds, survived, and in doing so, shown that human courage and intelligence could shine even in the darkest storms. And somewhere deep in the colony, whispers began, of the human who fixed far more than metal, who risked everything for life, who proved that humans, despite being fragile, alone, and outnumbered, could still shape the world with determination and heart. Haven 9 would never forget.